Her stepfamily called her infertile. They sold her like she was worthless. But one man, powerful, ruthless, and impossibly rich, stepped into her life, seeing something no one else did. What happens next will change everything she thought she knew about love, betrayal, and destiny. Can he protect her? And a secret that could destroy them both. Watch till the very end to uncover the shocking truth. Hey family, where are you listening from today? I hope you're ready, because what I'm about to share is going to take you on a roller coaster of emotions. Make sure you watch till the very end, because you won't want to miss a single moment of this story. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, so you never miss another amazing story. Now, let's dive right in. Alicia Dawson's heart pounded so violently she thought it might burst through her chest, her eyes flicking toward the heavy clouds rolling across the sky as if the heavens themselves were conspiring against her. Thunder growled in the distance, a low, menacing warning, and the wind whipped her soaked hair across her face, stinging her cheeks like cruel, invisible fingers. She struggled against her stepmother's iron grip, but it was futile. The older woman's fingers clamped around her arm with a coldness that froze the blood in Alicia's veins. Infertile! The word hissed through the storm like a curse, sharp and cutting, repeated over and over, as if saying it enough would make it true. Her stepmother's eyes were cruel, burning with a satisfaction that made Alicia's stomach twist. Jonas, their silent, obedient servant, stood behind, waiting for instructions, his eyes avoiding hers, as though he were already complicit in the betrayal. The luxurious black car waited at the curb, its polished surface reflecting flashes of lightning, a predator in the rain. Alicia could see the headlights slicing through the night like twin torches of judgment, bright and accusing. Her stepmother shoved her forward, shoving her into the storm, as if the rain itself could wash away the shame she had manufactured. Alicia's shoes sank slightly into the wet asphalt with every step, the storm dragging her closer to a destiny she couldn't yet comprehend. Her pulse raced, her chest heaved, and her fingers trembled as she tried to pull away, tried to scream, tried to run, but the two people who were supposed to care about her had abandoned her entirely, leaving her at the mercy of the unknown. The wind tore at the edges of her soaked coat, whipping it around her legs like some dark omen, while thunder shook the windows of the nearby buildings, vibrating deep into her bones. She felt small, insignificant, like a bird trapped in a cage made of lies, cruelty, and betrayal. And then the car door opened. Arik Valtor stepped out of the vehicle, tall and impossibly composed, every inch of him exuding power and control. He moved as though the storm itself had no hold over him, his gaze calm, calculating, yet impossibly intense. When his eyes fell on her, it wasn't pity she saw, it wasn't disdain. It was recognition, a clarity that cut deeper than any insult her stepmother had ever thrown. He saw past the dirt, the bruises, the rain-soaked hair plastered to her face. He saw the girl they had tried to bury beneath lies, and in that moment, Alicia felt like she was being seen for the first time in her life. Her stepmother's voice rose again, shrill and frantic. "She is worthless, she is infertile, she's nothing!" But Arik raised a single hand, and the words seemed to die mid-air. Even the wind seemed to pause as if obeying him. "I only speak to her," he said, his voice deep, calm, yet unyielding, cutting through the storm like a blade. His eyes didn't shift from hers. They held her, measured her, and in that gaze, Alicia felt both exposed and protected, an impossible contradiction that made her knees weaken. For a long moment, the rain fell like silver threads around them, the thunder clashing above, the storm showing its rage, yet all she could focus on was the man standing before her. His presence filled the space between them, commanding, yet strangely reassuring, as if the entire world had reduced itself to him and her alone. Jonas looked on, uncertain, but dared not speak. Her stepmother's face twisted with confusion and fury, Unaccustomed to being ignored, especially by someone who could see through her carefully constructed lies, Arik's lips curved slightly, but not into a smile, more like the hint of a threat, wrapped in mercy. He took a step closer, and the air seemed to shift. The storm's chaos dimmed in comparison to the intensity radiating from him. Elysia's breath caught in her throat, a mixture of fear and awe flooding her senses. She could feel the power he held, not just in his wealth, but in the way he existed, commanding, unflinching, dangerous, yet undeniably magnetic. The raindrops clung to her eyelashes, the storm blurring her vision, but she couldn't look away from him, couldn't blink away the truth she felt simmering in her chest. Then, almost impossibly softly, he leaned in, close enough that she could feel the faint heat of his body despite the cold rain, and whispered words that made her entire world tilt. "Did they tell you I wasn't buying you? I was rescuing you." The question hung in the air, heavier than the storm itself, a riddle wrapped in authority, and an unspoken promise. Elysia's mind reeled. Rescuing her. Could it be real, or was this just another cruel joke? Her stepmother's voice rose again, angry, indignant, screaming something about money, about contracts, about ownership, but Arik's eyes never wavered. He didn't flinch, he didn't argue. He simply stood, a pillar of unwavering certainty, his gaze locking with hers in a way that made the world narrow to this single, impossible moment. Her heart raced, thunder clashing inside her chest in time with the storm above. Every instinct screamed to run, yet every fiber of her being felt rooted in place, captivated by the presence of the man who could have ignored her, used her, or turned away. And yet he had not. He had chosen to stand there, in the storm, looking at her like she mattered more than anyone or anything. For the first time, the word infertile felt meaningless. The storm's roar faded against the steady, terrifying calm in Arik's eyes. And just as the sky split with a flash of lightning, illuminating his features like a god carved from stone and fire, Elysia realized she was on the edge of something irreversible, something that would change her life forever. She swallowed hard, trembling, unsure if it was fear or anticipation, or the delicate, dangerous mixture of both. Her stepmother's shouts became distant echoes, the car behind them faded into obscurity, and all that remained was the man in front of her, holding her fate in a single gaze, and just as the first bolt of lightning cracked the sky, a shiver ran down her spine, not from the cold, not from the rain, but from the terrifying, exhilarating knowledge that her life was no longer hers to control. It belonged, in some impossible way, to this man who had stepped out of the storm to claim it. Elysia's breath hitched. Jonas stepped back, unsure, hesitant, as if the rules of the world had been rewritten in that instant. Her stepmother faltered, rage giving way to disbelief. And Arik? He simply waited, unyielding, silent, allowing the tension to build, letting the storm mirror the tumult within her. And just when she thought her mind might break under the weight of the moment, Arik's voice cut through the rain again. Low, deliberate, almost intimate. "Do you trust me?" The words weren't a question. They were a challenge, an invitation, a lifeline wrapped in steel. Elysia's wet fingers clenched into fists, the rain dripping from her hair and coat, her pulse hammering like war drums. Could she trust him? Could she survive the choice he offered, or was it already made for her? The storm raged around them, but in the eye of it stood Arik Valtor, tall, unshakable, and utterly in control, and Elysia Dawson realized that her life, as she knew it, was ending, and something far more terrifying and intoxicating was beginning. This expanded Chapter 1 now contains immersive, detailed storytelling, strong emotional connection with Elysia's fear, confusion, and awe, Arik's commanding, protective presence fully developed. Did they tell you? I was rescuing you? And do you trust me? Elysia's chest still heaved from the storm, the cold rain dripping down her hair and shoulders, mixing with the tremor of adrenaline still coursing through her veins. The question Arik had asked, "Do you trust me?" echoed inside her mind, relentless, impossible to answer with certainty, yet too important to ignore. She stepped toward him hesitantly, her soaked shoes sticking to the asphalt, the storm beginning to lose its intensity, but leaving a lingering chill that seemed to seep into her bones. Arik didn't move, didn't urge her forward. He simply waited, calm and commanding, as if he had all the time in the world, and yet she could feel the unspoken urgency beneath his controlled exterior. Then, as if finally granting permission, he gestured toward the sleek black luxury car parked at the curb. "This way," he said, voice steady, and Elysia realized she had no choice but to obey. Her hands trembled as she opened the door, shivering in more than just the cold. Stepping inside, the warmth of the interior enveloped her immediately, wrapping around her like an unfamiliar promise of safety. Arik followed, closing the door behind them with a soft click that sounded impossibly final. She tried not to stare, tried not to feel the weight of his presence pressing close even without contact. Yet it was impossible. Every inch of her awareness seemed to anchor on him. The slow, confident set of his shoulders, the intensity in his eyes as they glanced briefly at her, the quiet power radiating from every measured movement. Even without touching her, he made her feel protected, shielded, as though the storm she had just endured, the betrayal, the years of humiliation, had all been leading to this singular moment. Her pulse raced as the car began to glide away from the curb, headlights cutting through the puddles on the wet streets, city lights blurring like streaks of gold and silver against the dark canvas of night. Elysia struggled to understand. Why would a man like him pay for someone they considered worthless, someone infertile, as her stepmother had hissed over and over like venom? She dared to glance at him, searching for any hint of condescension, judgment, or selfish intent, but found none. Instead, she saw a quiet certainty, a gaze that spoke of understanding, even reverence, as if he recognized not the lies she had been fed, but the truth beneath them. Her throat tightened, and she swallowed hard, unable to form the words she wanted to say, unsure if she dared speak at all. Hours, or was it minutes, passed as they drove through the city, Elysia's mind spinning with questions that had no answers. Every glance at the towering buildings, the blurred lights, the people scurrying in the rain-soaked streets, reminded her of the cage she had lived in for so many years, of the humiliation, the neglect, the whispered insults that had followed her like shadows. And yet now, for the first time, there was no cage. Not really. Not when he was here. Arik's hand rested lightly on the steering wheel, knuckles tight, posture calm, but alert. And Elysia felt the inexplicable pull of safety that he exuded, a warmth she had never known, even amidst the storm of betrayal she had just escaped. Finally, the car reached the gates of an enormous mansion, the stone walls glimmering faintly in the lingering rain, the lights casting long shadows over immaculately trimmed gardens. Elysia's eyes widened, taking in the scale of it, the kind of wealth she had only ever glimpsed from afar, the kind that seemed untouchable, unreachable, and yet now, in an instant, she was standing at the threshold. Arik stepped out first, holding the door for her, and the wind carried with it the faint scent of rain and freshly cut grass. She hesitated on the stone steps, overwhelmed by the grandeur, by the knowledge that this man, this stranger who had just plucked her from the clutches of cruelty, was not just wealthy, but untouchably powerful. He handed her a folder the moment she stepped inside the foyer, his hand brushing the space between them, but never actually touching her. The simple act made her heart skip, a mixture of relief, confusion, and something far more dangerous stirring deep within. Elysia's fingers clutched the folder, heavy, uncertain, trembling under the weight of possibilities. She opened it cautiously, expecting some cruel legal document, some contract that would define her as property, that would confirm the lies she had been told, yet instead her eyes widened as she read the words. It wasn't a marriage contract. It wasn't a binding ownership document. It wasn't an order or a demand. It was a freedom contract, carefully written, legally binding, but with clauses that allowed her to leave at any time, without question, without explanation. The concept alone made her chest ache, her lips parting in disbelief. Could it be real? Could anyone be so generous, so principled, so daring as to offer someone who had been cast aside by the world a chance at true freedom? Her pulse quickened, adrenaline mingling with a newfound hope, and she looked up at him, eyes wide, searching for some hint of deception. Arik leaned closer, just slightly, his voice dropping to a soft, controlled tone that sent shivers down her spine. "Because you were lied to," he said, and Alicia felt the weight of his gaze pressing against her, holding her accountable and yet protecting her in the same breath. "About what?" she whispered, her voice breaking slightly, trembling not from fear, but from the raw, unfamiliar emotion rising inside her. Arik's eyes softened for the first time, a flicker of something almost human beneath the steel of his exterior. "About your body, about your worth, about everything they made you believe," he said, each word deliberate, heavy with the gravity of truth. His gaze burned into hers, unrelenting, and Alicia felt the lie she had been living unraveling piece by piece, exposing her to a reality she had dared not hope for. "Alicia, you are not infertile," he said finally, the words dropping like a thunderclap that shook her to her core. For a long, suspended moment, she could only stare at him, uncomprehending, her mind racing to reconcile the years of lies with the reality of his statement, the storm, the betrayal, the pain. It all seemed distant now, as if her life had been a dark tunnel she was only now emerging from, and Arik was the light at the end, unwavering, unyielding, undeniable. Her hands shook as she set the folder down on the polished surface of the foyer table, unsure if she should trust this sudden revelation, unsure if it could possibly be real. And just as her heart began to race with the dangerous hope of possibility, the faintest click of a distant door opening echoed through the mansion, a sound so subtle she almost doubted it. But her instincts screamed that they were not alone. Someone could be watching, someone could be coming, and the fragile thread of safety that Arik had created for her felt suddenly tenuous. Hanging by a whisper, Arik's voice cut through the tension again, low, intimate, yet commanding. "You deserve to know the truth before anyone else tries to define it for you. But there are people who will never allow it. People who would do anything to keep you trapped in their lies." His jaw tightened, his eyes hardening ever so slightly, and Alicia felt a chill run down her spine, not from the cold or the rain, but from the dangerous knowledge that her stepfamily's reach might still be long, their intentions still deadly. She swallowed hard, heart hammering. Then what happens now?" she whispered, her voice barely audible in the grand, silent hall. Arik stepped even closer, close enough that she could feel the faint warmth of him, the calm, controlled power that seemed to radiate from his very being. "Now," he said slowly, deliberately, "you decide if you want to take the first step toward freedom, and I promise, I will protect you, no matter what comes for you." The words sent a shiver through her, a mixture of fear, exhilaration, and an unspoken attraction that made her knees weak. She wanted to speak, to ask more, to challenge him, but before she could, the faintest echo of a familiar voice, a voice from her past, full of cruelty and fury, drifted faintly through the mansion's halls. Someone had followed them. Someone was still hunting her. Alicia's breath hitched. Arik's gaze snapped toward the direction of the sound, sharp, protective, alive with danger. And in that instant, she realized that freedom, for all its promise, would not come easily. But with him, perhaps, just perhaps, she could survive it. Perhaps for the first time in her life, she could be more than a victim. The storm outside may have faded, but a far more dangerous storm was beginning inside the mansion, inside her heart, and inside the shadows of her past that refused to release her so easily. And as Arik extended a hand, not demanding, not forcing, merely offering, Alicia understood that the next step, whatever it might bring, would change her life forever. Alicia's hands still trembled from the moment Arik had extended his hand, the warmth and strength of it anchoring her in the midst of the storm of her emotions. The mansion around them was silent, almost oppressively still, except for the faint ticking of an ornate clock somewhere in the distance, a metronome marking the heartbeat of a world that had always treated her like nothing. Her own heartbeat thundered in her ears as Arik led her further into the heart of the mansion, through halls lined with priceless art and polished marble floors that reflected their movements like mirrors of destiny. The gravity of the moment pressed down on her, the weight of years spent in lies and humiliation finally colliding with the reality of someone seeing her true worth. Arik paused before a large oak desk, motioning for her to sit. His movements were deliberate, unhurried, each gesture a testament to control and calm that made Alicia feel both small and unreasonably safe at the same time. She sank into the leather chair, feeling the smooth surface under her fingers, grounding her even as her mind swirled with the impossibility of her situation. Then he opened a drawer, pulling out a stack of documents bound in crisp folders, the kind of folders that held secrets capable of rewriting lives. Alicia leaned forward, curiosity battling anxiety, and when he placed the files in front of her, her breath caught. Hospital reports, forensic documents, official papers, all meticulously detailed, all revealing the truth she had been denied her entire life. Each sheet tore away the lies her stepmother had spun, exposing years of manipulation, theft and fraud. They had stolen the records, forged reports, and labeled her infertile, not because she was, but because it suited them for money, for reputation, for power. Alicia's knees nearly gave out as the reality of it hit her, her body shaking as though it had been holding in decades of grief and humiliation and had only just found release. Arik stood silently beside her, his dark eyes watching her reactions with an intensity that made her feel both scrutinized and protected. He didn't touch her, didn't speak. He simply let her absorb the truth, letting the weight of it settle into her bones. The anger that had been coiled inside her for years began to stir, hot and dangerous, twisting with the grief and disbelief that had followed her like shadows. She remembered every cruel word, every insult, every sneer, every time she had been treated as if she were a defective object, disposable, worthless, a burden to be cast aside, and now, finally, she had proof that none of it had been real. Tears blurred her vision, but she refused to let them fall. Not yet. The storm outside, the memory of the rain that had soaked her the night she was sold, still lingered in her mind, and she could feel the echo of her stepmother's cruelty in every heartbeat. Alicia looked up, meeting Arik's gaze for the first time since the documents had been revealed, and in that instant, something inside her shifted. There was no pity in his eyes. No judgment, just clarity, an unspoken acknowledgement that she had endured too much, suffered too long, and yet, against all odds, had survived. "Why would you help me?" she whispered, her voice fragile, laden with disbelief and exhaustion. Her fingers fidgeted with the edge of the folder, twisting the papers into creases that felt like desperate attempts to hold on to something tangible she had no right to hope, no reason to trust. And yet, here was a man who had risked time, energy, resources, and perhaps something far more personal to see her freed from the cage her step-family had built. Arik's jaw clenched, tight, controlled, as if he were holding back a truth too heavy to spill all at once. His hands curled into fists briefly before releasing, a gesture almost imperceptible, but enough for her to sense the storm beneath his composed exterior. "Because someone once broke me the same way," he murmured, his voice low, raw, but tempered with control. There was a vulnerability there he rarely allowed anyone to see, a flicker of pain that mirrored her own, and it struck her with a force that made her chest tighten. She wanted to ask more, to know the story behind those words, but before she could speak, before she could find the courage to breach the silence, a sharp, insistent ringing cut through the air. Arik's phone rang from his pocket, the sound abrupt and jarring in the otherwise still room. He glanced at the screen, and in an instant, the warmth, calm, and quiet authority in his eyes shifted into steel, dark and commanding. Elysia felt her stomach twist, the air thickening around her as a sense of imminent danger crept in, subtle but undeniable. His lips pressed into a thin line, jaw tight, eyes narrowing at the name flashing on the screen. "They're coming for you, Elysia," he said, voice low but sharp, the words slicing through the fragile bubble of safety she had just begun to inhabit. Her breath caught in her throat, her pulse spiking as adrenaline surged once more. She wanted to speak, to demand who, why, what, but the fear rooted her to the spot. She could see it in his expression. This was serious, immediate, unavoidable. Her stepfamily, relentless and merciless, would not allow her to slip away so easily. The realization made her feel both small and reckless at the same time, a dangerous cocktail of fear and determination. Arik reached for a folder on the desk, flipping through it with precise, controlled movements. Papers shifted under his fingers like the pieces of a puzzle he had been meticulously assembling, the tension building in the room with every second. Elysia could feel the pulse of his authority, the quiet storm behind his composure, and she knew instinctively that whatever was coming would not be stopped by mere words. He was preparing, planning, calculating every possible scenario to protect her. And yet the danger remained immediate, looming and suffocating. The sound of rain still pattered against the windows, a reminder of the night she had been cast out, sold as worthless. But this time the storm inside the room was different. It was not one of betrayal. It was one of revelation, urgency, and the dangerous proximity of a man who had taken her fate into his own hands. Elysia's hands trembled. Her lips parted as she tried to form questions, but the knot in her throat made it impossible. She realized that freedom, safety, even love, all of it, was precariously balanced on the edge of what was about to happen. Arik finally looked up, dark eyes locking on hers, and the room seemed to hold its breath with them. "You need to be ready," he said, voice controlled, but edged with steel. "They will not stop until they believe they have taken back what they think belongs to them. And they are ruthless, cunning, and dangerous." His words sent a chill down her spine, but beneath the fear, a small ember of hope flickered. He would not let them take her. He would stand in front of her, and somehow, some way, she believed it. Elysia swallowed hard, every instinct screaming both to run and to trust, to hide and to fight, and she realized that she was standing at a precipice she had never imagined. The chasm between the lies she had been told and the truth she had been given. One wrong step could destroy everything, yet one right step could change her life forever. And with Arik beside her, silent, unyielding, and protective, she felt the first spark of courage ignite in her chest. Just as she dared to breathe, a soft click echoed from the hallway outside, subtle but deliberate, and her heart skipped. Someone was moving in the shadows, someone watching, assessing, waiting. She looked at Arik, eyes wide, and in that instant she understood. Her past had not released her yet, and the truth, as dangerous as it was, had drawn the predators closer than ever. Arik's hand hovered near the folder, ready, calculating, every muscle in his body taut, every sense alive. His eyes scanned the room, then back to her. and she realized that the storm outside had nothing on the storm brewing now. The danger was real. The truth had been revealed, and nothing, not even the man who had rescued her, could promise her what would happen in the next moments. The air between them thickened, every second stretching, the quiet tension snapping like a taut wire, and for the first time, Elysia felt that she was no longer just a girl caught in lies. She was a woman standing on the edge of her fate, with a man who could either be her salvation or the only person who could see her destroyed by what was coming. And as her hands clenched into fists on the edge of the table, she realized the truth. The life she had known was gone. The lies had been shattered, but the hunt had just begun. 4. Elysia's heart was still racing from the revelation, from the truth of her health, the lies of her step-family, and the magnitude of the danger she now faced. The room felt suddenly too small, too exposed, the shadows stretching long and threatening along the polished floors. She barely had time to process when Arik's eyes flicked toward a bank of security monitors on the wall, the soft glow of their screens illuminating his expression with urgent clarity. Her breath hitched, sensing the shift in the atmosphere, the change in him from calm protector to poised predator, ready to strike at a moment's notice. Her gaze followed his and froze. On one of the monitors, a black SUV crested the hill leading to the mansion, headlights cutting like twin daggers through the dim evening. And in that moment, Elysia understood the unspoken truth. They were coming. Her step-family, relentless, cruel and desperate, intent on reclaiming what they had lost, her freedom, her life, the leverage over her they had long wielded. Her stomach twisted, a cold dread mingling with adrenaline, and for the first time she truly saw the danger her past had cast into her present. Without hesitation, Arik moved decisively, with a precision born from years of commanding power. He grabbed her hand, not in fear, not in panic, but with a controlled urgency that anchored her amidst the chaos, threatening to unravel her. The touch was brief yet grounding, an unspoken promise that she would not face this alone. He led her through a discreet hallway, past an inconspicuous door that seemed to vanish into the wall when closed behind them, and Elysia followed, trembling with a mix of awe and terror. "Where are we going?" she whispered, her voice barely audible over the pounding of her own heart. "Somewhere safe," Arik replied, his tone clipped, deliberate, leaving no room for argument. Every movement he made conveyed purpose, a meticulous strategy for protection, and Elysia couldn't help but feel a surge of relief, despite the fear gnawing at her insides. The hallway ended at a section of floor that looked no different from the rest, yet a small panel clicked open at his touch, revealing the entrance to a hidden elevator. The metal door glimmered faintly in the dim light, the kind of design meant to exist without being noticed, to provide sanctuary in moments like this. The descent was slow, the elevator shaft silent save for the hum of the machinery, yet every second felt interminable to Elysia. She felt the tremor of anxiety ripple through her body, and for the first time, the reality of her situation hit with full force. The people who had tormented her, branded her as worthless, and attempted to manipulate her entire life were now actively hunting her, and she had nowhere to run except into the hands of the one man who had proven himself a stranger, a savior, and a protector all at once. When the elevator doors opened, Elysia was met with a stark contrast to the grandeur above. The underground room was functional, fortified, yet not oppressive. Walls lined with reinforced steel and monitors showed every possible angle of the mansion's perimeter. A few emergency supplies, communication devices, and medical kits were neatly arranged, as if the space had been prepared for an eventuality exactly like this. She realized with a shiver that Arik had anticipated every threat, every possible intrusion, every eventuality that could endanger her. Her pulse quickened as muffled shouting reached her ears from above. Her stepfamily, voices frantic with anger and desperation, were clawing at the gates of the life she was only just beginning to reclaim. Each shout, each harsh syllable, echoed against the reinforced walls and made Elysia flinch. The past had finally arrived, trying to reclaim her, and she realized the depth of her helplessness, except for the presence of Arik. His stance, firm and unyielding, communicated more than words ever could. He was prepared to confront them, to block them, to face the storm of their rage head-on, and she could only watch, caught between awe and terror. "They won't touch you again," he said, his voice low but unyielding, a promise that carried weight, certainty, and something fierce that stirred a strange heat within her. She stared at him, her chest heaving, her mind still spinning with disbelief. This man, who owed her nothing, yet had taken it upon himself to protect her more fiercely than anyone ever had, stood like a guardian between her and the cruelty of the world. And yet, the sound of footsteps descending a metal staircase outside the underground room shattered the fragile calm, replacing the muffled shouting above with the ominous rhythm of inevitability. Arik moved instinctively, stepping in front of her with precision. His shoulders squared, stance deliberate, eyes hard as steel. He projected an aura of absolute readiness, of a man who would meet any threat with force, calculation, and unrelenting will. "Stay behind me," he ordered, voice sharp, commanding, yet edged with urgency that betrayed the danger, "no matter what happens." Elysia nodded, though her hands shook uncontrollably, the reality of being hunted settling into every fiber of her body. She felt both terrified and strangely exhilarated, caught in the paradox of fear and the undeniable magnetism of the man before her. The footsteps grew louder, deliberate, echoing down the stairwell like the drumbeat of an approaching storm. And she realized that these weren't random intruders. These were people who knew her, who had orchestrated years of suffering and had now come to enforce the control they had always sought. Her mind raced as she tried to anticipate what would happen next. She wanted to flee, yet instinctively remained behind Arik, trusting his judgment, his preparation, and his raw, commanding presence. Every muscle in her body tensed as the first shadow fell across the door of the underground room, a long, distorted figure backlit by the dim light from the stairs above. The alarms had already gone silent, leaving only the echoing footsteps and the ominous silence that followed each one. Elysia's breath hitched, and she felt the cold sweat of anticipation prickling her skin. She realized with a start that her life was now entirely entwined with the outcome of this confrontation. Every step, every decision, every heartbeat could mean freedom, or danger beyond what she had ever imagined. Arik's gaze never wavered, sharp and precise, tracking the shadows as they grew closer. His hand hovered near a concealed weapon, movement subtle but deliberate, a silent promise of protection and lethal response. Elysia's hands clutched the edge of the table nearby, nails biting into the wood as the tension coiled tighter with every approaching step. Her stomach lurched with a mix of fear and adrenaline, the anticipation building to a point almost unbearable. The first figure appeared at the edge of the room's metal doorframe, hesitation clear but resolve unbroken. Elysia caught a glimpse of a familiar silhouette, and her stomach sank. It was her past, in human form, clawing to reclaim control, to undo the freedom she had just barely tasted. Her pulse thundered in her ears, and she realized she had never felt more alive, more vulnerable, or more completely dependent on the man standing before her. Arik's voice broke the tense silence, calm yet razor-sharp. "I warned you. Stay behind me. Any sudden move, and it ends badly for them." His eyes, dark and unyielding, reflected a readiness that both terrified and reassured her. Elysia nodded again, gripping the edge of the table, feeling the weight of reality settle like iron across her shoulders. She understood fully that there was no turning back. The hunt had truly begun, and she was now at the center of a storm far larger than herself. A single step echoed closer, and the shadows began to form into recognizable figures, shapes that triggered a memory of fear and resentment buried deep in her past. And in that instant, Elysia realized something chilling. Even if she survived this confrontation, her life would never be the same. The past had caught up to her, but so had Arik, and his determination promised that the battle would be fierce, unyielding, and unforgettable. The room seemed to shrink, the tension palpable, every sound amplified. Elysia felt her knees weaken, her hands cold, yet a spark of resolve ignited within her. She would not run, not entirely. She would not cower, not with him there. And as the first hand reached for the door, the first shadow crossed into the underground light. She understood that this moment, the clash of past and present, would define everything to come. And somewhere deep within the storm of fear and adrenaline, Elysia felt a single, undeniable truth. She had never felt more alive, more protected, or more certain that her future was worth fighting for, even if it meant facing the demons she thought she had left behind. The tension in the underground room still thrummed like a living pulse, each heartbeat of Elysia's mingling with the sharp, controlled rhythm of Arik's own. She had barely begun to process the shadows moving outside, the reality of her past converging with her fragile present, when the heavy metal door creaked violently and burst open with a force that made her jump. Her eyes widened in alarm, heart leaping as adrenaline surged through her veins. But it wasn't the people she feared, her stepfamily, cruel and desperate. It was someone else entirely. A man stepped into the room, shoulders hunched from exertion, chest heaving as if he had run a marathon, yet his gaze was sharp, precise, and entirely professional. He was Arik's private investigator, a man who rarely showed emotion, his every action calculated and deliberate. Papers clutched tightly in his hand shifted as he caught his breath, eyes flicking once at Arik, then locking on Elysia with quiet intensity. "I have the results," he panted, voice controlled but strained. Arik's expression, already a mask of command and authority, shifted subtly, fury replaced by stunned realization, his usually impenetrable composure cracking just enough to reveal a flicker of disbelief. "Elysia," Arik said, slow and deliberate, the gravity of his voice freezing her in place. Every syllable carried weight, and she felt it press against her chest like a physical force. "You need to sit for this." His dark eyes searched hers, urging, demanding, warning. At the same time, she felt the room tilt, the air thick with anticipation, and obeyed, her legs weak and hands trembling as she sank into the nearest chair. The world seemed to narrow to the small table between them, to the documents the investigator now laid down with careful precision. Elysia's hands shook as she watched the pages spread across the polished surface, the flickering lights reflecting in her wide eyes. Numbers, charts, medical terminology, each line more impossible than the last, revealed a truth that defied the years of lies she had been forced to endure. She felt her stomach tighten, a mix of awe, fear, and disbelief churning in her chest. She read the words over and over, unable to fully comprehend, yet instinctively understanding the magnitude. She was not broken. Her body, the very thing her stepfamily had weaponized against her, was perfectly healthy. She was capable, fertile, alive in ways she had never been allowed to feel. Arik's presence was constant, a shadow beside her, and she felt the weight of his gaze as it burned into her. But it was not pity in his eyes. No, it was something far more intense, far more consuming. There was a hunger there, quiet yet undeniable, something that had been restrained with immense control since the moment he had first seen her drenched in rain, humiliated and cast aside. It pressed against the edges of her consciousness, a dangerous magnetic force that left her simultaneously terrified and fascinated. "Your body was never the problem," he said, voice low, measured, dropping an octave as if the gravity of the words needed to resonate in the room itself. "You were never broken." Each word struck her like a hammer, reverberating through her soul. Elysia's breath caught, and for a moment silence enveloped them, the outside world and its threats fading into an almost surreal quiet. She wanted to speak, to thank him, to question him, to demand what this meant. But words failed her. Arik stepped closer, deliberate, the distance between them charged with an intensity neither could deny. Every movement was controlled, measured, yet in the subtle brush of his hand against the table as he leaned forward, there was a promise, a declaration of something deeper, something untamed. Elysia's pulse raced, every nerve alive with the knowledge of what he could do, what he could not resist. The room seemed smaller now, each shadow, each flicker of light amplified by the tension between them. He began, pausing, jaw tight, eyes darkening as he struggled with restraint. "If we stay in this room any longer, I'm not sure I can." The words hit her like a physical force, sending shivers down her spine. His voice was controlled, yet the restraint, the barely contained intensity, left no room for doubt. The air crackled with the unspoken, a tension thick enough to taste, and Elysia felt herself teetering on the edge of something irreversible. The investigator cleared his throat quietly, a subtle reminder that the world outside still existed, that threats were real, yet he made no move to intervene. It was as if even he understood the delicate balance of power in this room, the dance of control and surrender that had begun between Elysia and Arik. The documents on the table became almost insignificant compared to the weight of what was happening in the space between them. The silent acknowledgement of desire, trust, danger. She was confronted with the truth of her body, the undeniable power of her existence, and a man who had not only saved her but desired her in ways that defied reason, morality, and expectation. The paradox left her breathless, every sense heightened, every nerve alert. Arik's gaze softened for the briefest of seconds, yet there remained a tension, a warning, a barely suppressed fire. He was aware of the pull between them, the danger, the risk of losing control, yet he had chosen restraint until now. And now, with the knowledge of her fertility, the proof that her body was perfect, the subtle shift in their dynamic was palpable. Elysia felt her knees weaken, hands gripping the edge of the table, as if the solid surface could anchor her to reality amidst the storm of sensation and fear. Outside the underground room, the world still pressed against them, a distant echo of danger and pursuit. But inside, time seemed to slow, each second stretching, thick with anticipation and the unspoken promise that something irrevocable was on the verge of being unleashed. The quiet click of the door from the investigator's departure was a stark reminder that the world continued, that the threats had not vanished, yet it also amplified the intensity of the moment, leaving Elysia alone with the storm that was Arik. Her thoughts wove through fear, wonder, desire, and disbelief in a dizzying spiral. She wanted to retreat, to find safety, yet every instinct drew her closer, tethered to him by trust, fascination, and the unspoken knowledge that nothing would ever be the same. The documents lay on the table, a tangible proof of her freedom and truth, yet it was Arik's presence that held her attention entirely. The promise in his eyes, the barely restrained hunger, and the unwavering intensity left her suspended between fear and anticipation. A sudden creak echoed from the far corner of the room, subtle but undeniable, a reminder that even here, safety was fragile. Her pulse spiked, adrenaline coursing through her veins, but she remained rooted, caught in the gravity of the man before her, the reality of her newfound truth, and the undeniable pull of what was about to happen. The room felt charged, every breath, every glance, every heartbeat a countdown to a moment that could change everything. Elysia swallowed hard, her chest tight, heart hammering as she realized the truth. Her life, her freedom, her body, and her desires were now intertwined with a man who had seen her broken, saved her, and now desired her in ways she had never imagined. The documents were proof, but Arik was the storm, the danger, the sanctuary, and the fire all at once, and in that charged silence she understood that the night had only just begun, that everything was on the edge of transformation, and that the next moment would decide not only her fate, but the course of their lives forever. 6. The first night after the revelation, Elysia's mind was a whirlwind of disbelief, wonder, and a fragile, trembling hope she hadn't felt in years. Arik's gaze had not left her once, since the investigator had departed, the intensity in his eyes both terrifying and electrifying. Every step he took toward her was deliberate, a silent assertion that he was no longer just a protector, but something more, someone who wanted her in ways she had never dared imagine. She trembled beneath his scrutiny, her body alive to his presence, yet unsure how to navigate the torrent of feelings coursing through her. When he finally closed the distance, the moment was so fragile it could have shattered with a single misstep. But instead of overwhelming her, Arik's hands were gentle, reverent, as if touching her would risk undoing the fragile threads of trust that had taken so long to weave. He brushed her hair from her face, his touch a whisper against her skin, and whispered softly, almost to himself, "You're mine." The words wrapped around her like fire, igniting a spark that had lain dormant through years of cruelty and neglect. Elysia's pulse surged, her knees weak, and she realized she had never felt truly seen, truly wanted, until this very moment. The following day brought a hesitant routine, a fragile dance of glances, touch, and the unspoken acknowledgement of desire. Arik's presence was pervasive, steady, yet his restraint was palpable, creating an exquisite tension that left her both breathless and safe. They spoke little, for words seemed inadequate against the gravity of what had begun to bloom between them. Every fleeting brush of his fingers, every deliberate look carried the weight of intention and a promise she couldn't yet name. By the second night, their stolen closeness had evolved. The walls of the mansion seemed to recede as they existed in a world of their own making, cocooned from the past, from threats, from pain. Arik's touch grew more insistent, yet never careless. He explored with an intimacy that was both commanding and tender, showing her the depth of his desire without shattering the fragile trust she had begun to place in him. Each whispered word, each low murmur against her skin, was a revelation. "You're beautiful. You are wanted. You are mine." Elysia felt herself unravel in ways she hadn't allowed in years, the years of torment and belittlement fading into insignificance as she surrendered fully to the intensity of their connection. The storm of passion was balanced by moments of gentle reassurance, his hands cradling her as if she were a rare, delicate treasure he had discovered and vowed never to harm. The intimacy was both physical and emotional. Each night they found themselves entwined not just in body, but in soul, bridging the gaps left by years of loneliness and betrayal. As the third day passed, the fire between them grew, consuming hesitation, doubt, and fear. Arik's intensity was matched by an emotional vulnerability he revealed only to her, a glimpse into a man who had been hardened by the world but softened imperceptibly by her presence. Their nights became a rhythm of discovery and passion, his lips tracing whispered affirmations into her skin, his voice dropping low, each word a tether anchoring her to a new reality where she was cherished, not used. By the fourth night, Elysia had begun to recognize the profound effect they had on one another. She saw the restraint in him falter just enough to hint at the depths of his longing, the nights growing hotter, fiercer, more consuming. Yet every act, every caress, was punctuated by care, ensuring that each moment of surrender was safe, that each wave of passion did not drown her in uncertainty, but instead reaffirmed her worth. Arik's every movement, every whisper, reinforced a truth she had only recently discovered. She was desirable, powerful, and no longer at the mercy of anyone but herself and the man who had chosen her. The fifth day brought an unspoken ritual of closeness, a rhythm they had begun to understand instinctively. Arik's words became more personal, softer, more intimate. "No one will hurt you again." The cadence of his promises echoed in her mind, a soothing balm against the scars left by her past. Alicia, in turn, found herself responding, her own desires and fears mingling with his, creating a bond that transcended physical intimacy and touched the very core of their beings. By the sixth night, the intensity of their connection was almost unbearable. Their passion was not merely lust, it was a collision of emotion, desire, protection, and mutual surrender. Every kiss, every touch, every whispered word carried the weight of vulnerability, of history, of survival, and of hope. Alicia realized she had not only surrendered to him, but to herself, allowing a freedom of expression and desire she had never known, a reclamation of power that had been stolen from her long ago. Then came the seventh morning, sunlight spilling across the sheets in a golden cascade, illuminating the soft curves of the room and the aftermath of nights filled with passion, tenderness, and vulnerability. Alicia awoke feeling strange, her body trembling with a disquiet she couldn't immediately name. Her stomach churned, nausea curling like a storm within her, and a dizzy haze clouded her mind. Her pulse raced, and she realized with growing alarm that the sensation felt hauntingly familiar, the way her body reacted in moments of immense change. Arik, ever alert, was instantly at her side, the fear and concern in his expression sharpening as he assessed her pallor, her trembling hands, and the slight sheen of sweat across her forehead. "Alicia." His voice was taut with worry, eyes searching her face with a precision that left no room for denial. "Are you feeling sick because of me? Or is it something else?" His words hung in the air, heavy with tension, a cliffhanger that froze Alicia mid-breath. She shook her head, unable to respond immediately, as the realization dawned slowly, terrifyingly, thrillingly, on her. Could it be? The thought trembled at the edge of consciousness, tantalizing and frightening in equal measure. Her heart hammered, each beat a drum of anticipation, and she looked into Arik's eyes, searching for answers, clarity, reassurance. His gaze, a mixture of concern and barely restrained intensity, only amplified the question circling in her mind. The world outside seemed to hold its breath with them, as if even the universe waited for the revelation, for the confirmation that would forever change the course of their lives. The morning light streamed across the room, highlighting the tension, the desire, the fragile anticipation. Alicia felt her knees weaken slightly, her hands clutching the edge of the bed, and knew that whatever truth awaited, nothing would ever return to the way it had been before. The moment stretched, the silence thick, pregnant with possibility, every tick of the clock counting down to an answer that promised to shift everything. Alicia's mind raced, heart pounding, every nerve electrified, and she realized with a surge of awareness that the week of passion, discovery, and surrender had led to this singular, pivotal instant. The revelation about her body, the undeniable connection, and the overwhelming intensity of Arik's desire had all converged into this moment, a moment that would decide not only their futures, but the very nature of their bond. A sudden soft creak at the bedroom door reminded her that the world outside still existed, that danger and responsibility were never far away, yet it only heightened the intensity of the moment, sharpening the cliffhanger that hung between them. Arik's hand reached for hers, his touch firm, reassuring, and yet charged with a desire that left her trembling. Every fiber of her being responded, caught between fear, excitement, and the thrill of the unknown. Elysia realized that the past week had transformed her in ways she could barely articulate. She had discovered trust, passion, safety, and a raw, consuming desire she had never thought possible. And now, as her stomach tightened, nausea curling into something more profound, and her heartbeat raced in a way that seemed to echo the very foundation of her being, she understood that the week of fire, passion, and emotional surrender was about to reach a climax unlike anything she had ever imagined. Arik's eyes never left hers, dark and intense, and she saw the flicker of realization, of anticipation, of something unspoken in his gaze. His fingers brushed hers, subtle but grounding, as if anchoring both of them to the moment before the truth revealed itself. The tension was almost unbearable, the energy in the room electric, the weight of the past week converging with the uncertainty of this morning into a cliffhanger that left the outcome unknown, the suspense nearly tangible. And as Elysia swallowed, her breath hitching, staring into Arik's unwavering gaze, she realized the truth could no longer be avoided. The morning sun glinted off the polished floor, the air thick with tension, and the entire world seemed to pause, waiting for the revelation that would either solidify their bond forever or change everything in an instant. 7. The sunlight in the bedroom filtered softly across the sheets, painting golden streaks on Elysia's hair, yet the world around her felt surreal, almost suspended in time. Her stomach churned as she fumbled toward the small white box that sat on the nightstand, a simple object with the power to alter every thread of her existence. Her hands shook violently, heart hammering against her ribs, each beat echoing like a drum of warning and anticipation. She had never felt this combination of fear, hope, and awe before. The week of passion, of closeness, of shared confessions and whispered promises had led to this singular moment, and now her life was poised on the precipice of transformation. With trembling fingers, she opened the box and revealed the test inside. Her breath caught in her throat, and for a suspended moment, she couldn't even focus on the lines, her mind caught between disbelief and longing. And then it became undeniable. Positive. The two little lines stared back at her, simple yet monumental, a truth she had only dared to imagine. Elysia's eyes widened in shock, a gasp escaping her lips as her hands flew instinctively to cover her mouth. The word repeated in her mind, thunderous, overwhelming, pregnant. The room seemed to tilt, spinning around her. Yet the world outside could not have mattered less. Every memory of cruelty, every insult her stepfamily had hurled at her, every moment of humiliation and pain now collided with the undeniable fact of life growing inside her. A new reality had begun, fragile yet potent, undeniable and irreversible. She sank to the bed, breathless, heart racing, mind unable to fully comprehend what the tiny test now confirmed. Arik, who had been quietly standing at the doorway, had watched her entire morning ritual unfold with restrained intensity. His usual composure, the unshakable calm that had earned him his reputation, faltered the instant he saw the small, tremulous expression of disbelief on her face. His eyes, always so controlled and calculating, now mirrored hers, widening in silent, stunned understanding. The world seemed to pause around them, the golden morning light contrasting the storm of realization that suddenly roared between them. Elysia! His voice, normally commanding and unwavering, trembled, low and almost unrecognizable. He took a slow, deliberate step toward her, his chest rising and falling as though trying to contain a hurricane of emotion that threatened to escape with every breath. "You're carrying my child." The words spilled into the air with a fragile reverence, laden with awe, gratitude, and an intensity that made her knees weaken. He knelt beside her, cupping her face with hands that had been capable of commanding empires, now trembling as if the fragile life within her had touched something unspoken and sacred in him. She looked into his eyes, wide and brimming with tears, seeing a man stripped of his usual armor, a man consumed with raw emotion and wonder. Arik's lips brushed her forehead gently, lingering in a touch that conveyed more than words ever could: love, protection, devotion, and the overwhelming gravity of what this meant. Alicia felt herself trembling beneath his fingers, the weight of their past week, their shared intimacy, and now the undeniable reality of their future pressing upon her like a tidal wave. Before she could even voice her own reaction, before the gravity of this truth could fully settle in her chest, Arik's phone buzzed sharply, breaking the almost sacred moment. The sound sliced through the room like a sudden jolt of electricity, tension immediately snapping to attention. He glanced at the screen, his jaw tightening, as his expression shifted from awe and wonder to steel-edged vigilance. The words on the screen were simple, yet explosive. Her stepfamily had filed a legal claim to take her back, to wrest her from the life she was just beginning to embrace. Alicia's breath caught, panic fluttering through her chest. She had just discovered life growing inside her, a new beginning, a symbol of hope and permanence. And yet, the world outside, represented by those who had sought to destroy her, was still reaching for her, threatening to steal what had just been restored. She looked at Arik, eyes wide and filled with a mix of fear and need. He was the only constant, the only protector, the only man who could shield her from the storm she had narrowly escaped. Arik's expression hardened, jaw clenched, the storm of emotions within him manifesting in every controlled, deliberate movement. He rose slowly, every muscle taut with intent, and approached the window, scanning the world outside, as if willing it to reveal the extent of the threat. Yet even in the midst of the unfolding danger, his eyes never left Alicia, and his hand found hers once more, grounding her, anchoring her in the fragile bubble of safety that he created for her. "Alicia," he murmured, voice low, deliberate, as though speaking too loudly would shatter the fragile peace between them. "They cannot touch you. Not now, not ever. I will not allow it." His grip tightened around hers, steadying, protective, and yet the vulnerability in his eyes betrayed the enormity of what he was feeling: awe at the life they had created together, fear at the threat looming over them, and a profound, unyielding love that had taken root in the past week and now demanded action. Alicia's fingers intertwined with his instinctively, heart racing in tandem with his, and she realized that whatever had happened before, the abuse, the humiliation, the stepfamily's lies, was entirely irrelevant compared to the future she now held in her hands. Yet even as hope surged, a whisper of fear curled around her spine. What if they succeeded? What if the claim was legally binding? What if the fragile new life she carried was imperiled before it could even fully exist? Arik sensed her fear immediately, leaning closer, brushing a stray strand of hair from her face, eyes dark and intense. "No one will take you from me. Not now. Not ever," he vowed, his voice low, unwavering, and yet trembling with emotion. He pressed a gentle kiss to her temple, lingering, grounding her, as though his lips could somehow shield both her and the tiny life within her from the world's cruelty. Alicia felt tears spill freely, relief and terror mingling in a heady, almost dizzying rush. Outside the walls of the mansion, the world moved, threats schemed, and her stepfamily maneuvered through legal channels with ruthless precision. But inside this room, within the circle of Arik's arms and his unwavering gaze, Alicia felt the fragile beginnings of something permanent. She was pregnant, yes, but she was also chosen, adored, protected, and loved in a way that eclipsed every moment of her tortured past. Yet the moment remained taut with suspense, a quiet tension that whispered of the battles yet to come. The legal claim, the manipulations of her stepfamily, and the looming uncertainty of what the courts might decree, all of it hung in the air, a shadow lurking at the edges of their fragile triumph. Arik's hand on hers was the only constant, his steady heartbeat a counterpoint to the storm building just beyond the mansion walls. As Alicia looked up at him, eyes wide and brimming with tears, she saw not just the man she had begun to trust and desire, but a fierce protector who would stand against the world for her, for their child, and for the fragile, burgeoning life they had created together. And in that glance, that single unspoken acknowledgement of shared resolve and deepening love, she realized that nothing, no law, no family, no threat, would be able to undo what had begun. The room seemed to pulse with a quiet, electric anticipation, each second stretched to its limit as Alicia absorbed the revelation and Arik absorbed her reaction. The sunlight streamed through the window, casting everything in a surreal glow, yet the tension in the air remained taut, as if the universe itself awaited the next move. Outside forces were gathering, dangers lurked, but inside, in this intimate space, a new life, a new bond, and an unbreakable connection had been forged, and nothing could sever it without a fight. Alicia's mind raced, heart pounding, body trembling, yet amid the storm of emotions there was clarity. This child, this connection, this man standing beside her in awe, love, and unwavering resolve, represented a future she had once thought impossible. And though the legal claim threatened on the horizon, though the shadow of her step-family loomed ominously, she knew with certainty that together they could face whatever came next, and that nothing would ever diminish the life that had begun within her. Her breath hitched as Arik pressed a final, lingering kiss to her forehead, his eyes holding hers, deep and unwavering. "We'll face them together," he murmured, voice steady, unwavering, yet infused with raw emotion, "and no one will take you or this child from me." Alicia felt her tears spill freely, a mixture of relief, joy, and fear, the weight of the revelation pressing upon her chest, and as the golden morning light bathed them both, the world beyond seemed to fade, leaving only the two of them, and the storm of love, protection, and destiny that now bound them irrevocably. The courtroom was packed, the atmosphere thick with tension, whispers threading through the air like restless ghosts. Alicia's palms were sweaty, heart pounding, each beat echoing the storm of fear, anticipation, and hope churning within her. She had never imagined herself in a place like this, not as a defendant or a victim, but as a woman fighting for her very freedom, the life she had long been denied, and the child growing within her. Every person in the room seemed to carry judgment, curiosity, or skepticism, but none of it mattered. All that mattered was the man beside her, the one who had rescued her from a life of lies, cruelty, and despair. Arik stood tall, unflinching in front of the judge. His presence alone silenced the murmurs, commanding attention like a king entering his throne room. His eyes, sharp and piercing, scanned the room with unwavering focus, assessing every angle, every potential threat, every attempt to manipulate the proceedings. But beneath the polished, composed exterior lay the fire that had fueled him for the past week, the fierce protectiveness, the unyielding love, and the righteous fury that no one, not even a courtroom full of skeptics, could shake. The prosecution presented their case, their words slick with deceit, their evidence carefully curated to paint Alicia as a property, a commodity, a pawn in a twisted game of inheritance and money. Documents were waived, accusations hurled, every attempt made to claw her back into the life that had once been stolen from her. Yet Arik's presence was a silent shield, his hands clenched at his sides, jaw tight, eyes burning with the promise that nothing could reach her, nothing could touch what was rightfully hers now. When it was his turn to speak, he did not begin with threats or legal jargon. Instead, he spoke from a place deeper than contracts, deeper than wealth, deeper than the rigid exterior the world associated with him. He told the truth, laying bare every crime, every forged document, every lie her stepfamily had used to manipulate, humiliate, and attempt to control her. He spoke not as a businessman defending an investment, but as a man defending the woman who had become the center of his life, the mother of his child, the embodiment of everything he had once thought unreachable but now could not live without. Alicia watched him, eyes wide, tears threatening to spill as each revelation unfolded. She felt the weight of years of torment lift, piece by piece, as the courtroom absorbed the evidence of her stepfamily's deceit. Every lie, every insult, every attempt to belittle her was stripped bare, exposed in the light of truth. And as she watched, she felt something she had never allowed herself to feel fully: freedom. A freedom that pulsed through her veins like electricity, thrilling and terrifying, delicate yet unassailable. The judge's gaze shifted to Arik, eyebrows raised, awaiting explanation, perhaps impressed but also curious. When asked why he had fought so fiercely for Alicia, he did not speak as a man motivated by duty, obligation, or law. He did not speak with calculated logic or strategic precision. Instead, he spoke with the raw, unfiltered honesty of a heart that had already chosen his eyes, dark and unwavering, found hers across the room, and for a heartbeat, the chatter, the tension, and the formalities melted away. Taking her trembling hands in his, feeling the warmth, the life, and the vulnerability in her fingers, he said with deliberate clarity, "Because she is the mother of my child, the woman I love, and the only future I want." His voice rang through the courtroom, low, deep, unyielding, carrying not just conviction, but the weight of passion, devotion, and unshakable certainty. The room fell silent, the echo of his words hanging like a tangible presence, silencing every whisper, every doubt, every shallow claim of those who had sought to control her. Alicia's eyes brimmed with tears, vision blurred by emotion, as the magnitude of his declaration settled over her. For the first time in her life, she felt seen, truly, completely, without expectation or shame. The man who had rescued her, loved her, and protected her had declared not only his devotion but his intention to fight for them, for their child, and for the unshakable bond they now shared. Her heart pounded so loudly she feared it might betray her, yet every beat sang a song of relief, love, and an overwhelming sense of destiny fulfilled before she could even respond. Before the storm of emotion could settle, Arik did something that left the entire courtroom breathless. Slowly, deliberately, he sank to one knee, his eyes never leaving hers, unwavering, burning with intensity. The murmurs of the room grew into a stunned hush. The collective breath of the audience held as the impossible became tangible. Every detail, the sheen of his polished shoes, the sharp cut of his suit, the fire in his gaze, spoke of a man who would stop at nothing to claim the woman who had become his world. "Alicia," he said, voice steady despite the magnitude of the moment, "will you marry me?" His words were simple, yet carried the weight of a lifetime, the promise of devotion, the culmination of every act of protection, every stolen glance, every whispered word shared between them in the past week. The entire courtroom seemed to suspend reality, waiting for the answer to a question that transcended legalities, contracts, or possessions. This was not a matter of law, it was a matter of the heart, destiny, and the undeniable truth that love, when forged under fire, could withstand every challenge. Alicia's breath hitched, tears streaming freely now, her hands trembling in his as she realized the full scope of the moment. The man who had taken her from a world of cruelty, who had seen her for who she truly was, who had loved her before the world had deemed her worthy, was asking her to join him forever. Her heart soared, disbelief mingling with exhilaration, and for the first time she allowed herself to truly hope, to embrace the love she had been denied for so long. And then, as if the universe itself conspired to bless the moment, she nodded, her voice trembling yet resolute. "Yes, yes, Arik, I will." A gasp rippled through the courtroom, the tension breaking into a collective exhale. Yet for Alicia and Arik, Nothing else existed except the bond, the promise, and the life they had created together. Arik rose slowly, lifting her into his arms with a strength that was both protective and tender, pressing a lingering kiss to her lips that spoke of passion, devotion, and the unbreakable bond forged in the fire of shared trials. The courtroom remained silent, awestruck, but the only reality that mattered was the warmth of their bodies pressed together, the future of their child, and the unshakable certainty of a love that had endured betrayal, pain, and the darkest shadows of human cruelty. Outside, life would continue. Legal battles and enemies might linger, but within the walls of that room, the unshakable truth was clear. Alicia was free, loved, and cherished. Arik was her protector, her partner, and the father of the child that would unite them forever. Their journey, marked by betrayal, passion, and resilience, had reached a triumphant apex, a moment of unassailable joy, triumph, and promise. As they embraced, the judge smiled faintly. The courtroom staff exchanged whispers, and the world seemed to exhale in relief. Yet Alicia knew, as she felt Arik's steady heartbeat against hers, that this was only the beginning, not of struggle, but of life, of family, and of a love so fierce it could withstand anything. The final vow had been made, the chains of the past broken, and a new chapter had begun, a chapter written by their courage, their desire, and their unbreakable bond. And in that golden, sunlit room, with the courtroom witnessing their triumph and the shadow of the past dissolved forever, Alicia and Arik shared a kiss, deep, lingering, and infinitely tender, a kiss that sealed not just a promise, but the certainty of a love that would endure for a lifetime. Thank you for listening, family. If this story touched your heart even a little, make sure you hit that subscribe button so you never miss the next one. And tell me in the comments, what part shocked you the most? Your support means everything. Until next time, stay blessed, stay safe, and keep coming back to Beyond Color Stories, where every story goes deeper than you expect. See you in the next chapter.